The letter was the third one. Dennis Cale knew it before he opened it. The envelope was the same cream color as the first two. Turn address, the same Harwick County Athletics Department stamp. And he read it standing beside the riding mower, with his work gloves still on. The late October sun cutting low across the practice field. Coach Marty Pellegrino watched from the equipment shed. He would say later that he was simply retrieving a tackling dummy, that he hadn't meant to see anything. The truth was he'd been watching Dennis Cale for 3 years now. The way you watch a man carry a weight you're not sure you could lift yourself. Dennis folded the letter in thirds, tucked it into the back pocket of his work pants, and pulled his gloves back on. That was it. No words, fist against the fence, no staring at the sky. He climbed back onto the mower and kept going. Marty went back inside. He was the one who had voted no, all 3 times. Standards, he'd told the head coach. The man has no formal credentials. Board requires a certification. It wasn't personal. At 3:15, a boy appeared at the gate by the shed. 12 years old, maybe 13. He had Dennis's same set jaw and the same steadiness in his eyes, which was a remarkable thing to see in a child. He stood at the gate the way a boy stands when he's been told to wait, and he will wait as long as it takes. When Dennis rolled the mower to a stop and cut the engine, the boy walked over, and Dennis rested one hand on the back of his neck for just a moment, the way a father does when there are no words that fit, and then they walked to the truck together. Marty went home that night and could not have said why the image stayed with him. The boy who arrived at Harwick High the following August was named Jordan Vess, and almost everything about his file was a problem. Suspended twice at his previous school. Academic probation. A disciplinary note that used the phrase "cannot be coached." The athletic director had already told the head coach, Bud Harlan, that Jordan was a liability the program didn't need, and Bud, who had built 22 years on the unbroken logic that problems compound, had agreed. What nobody in that meeting had accounted for was Dennis Cale. Jordan had shown up 2 days before the fall semester, duffel bag over one shoulder, register late. He'd gotten lost looking for the main office, ended up on the practice field, and found Dennis re-chalking the yard lines alone. He'd stood for 10 minutes without saying anything. Dennis had said, without looking up, "You can hold this end." Jordan had held the end of the chalk line for an hour. They hadn't exchanged more than a dozen words. When it was done, Dennis had said, "Be here at 6 tomorrow if you want to run routes." And Jordan had said, "Okay," and that was how it started. Marty heard about it 2 weeks later. Rumors moved fast in a small program and went to Bud. "You need to shut that down," Bud said. "The kid is a problem, and Cale's not a coach." "I know," Marty said. "I'll tell him." But he went to the practice field at 6 the next morning instead of Dennis's shed. And what he saw kept him at the fence for 40 minutes. Dennis ran routes with Jordan in the gray November light. No pads, no audience. He didn't raise his voice. When Jordan ran sloppy, he said one word, "again," and Jordan ran it again. When Jordan ran it right, Dennis said nothing at all, but there was a precision in his silence that told you everything. He moved with the ease of a man who had once been very good at this, before whatever had ended it, and he coached the way a man coaches when he has nothing to prove, only something to give. Marty went back to his car and drove to school, and did not tell Bud anything. The months stacked. Jordan made the JV squad, then the varsity depth chart, then the starting lineup. And every step of it happened in a way that made the coaching staff feel vaguely unsettled, as if the growth were slightly outside their jurisdiction. In the film room, Jordan was already running the adjustments Dennis had taught him before, the coaches called them. On the field, he arrived at the spot before the play developed. He had been coached, and coached well, and everyone who watched knew by whom. In the spring of Jordan's junior year, Dennis submitted a 4th application. Assistant coach, defensive backs, voluntary unpaid. Bud rejected it in 2 days. "The certification requirement stands," he told Marty. "I've got parents on this board. I can't make exceptions." Marty said nothing. He drove to the practice field that afternoon and found Dennis restringing the net on the field goal, and he almost said something, and then he didn't, and he drove home. He had voted no 4 times now. He told himself it was procedure. What he couldn't reconcile, alone in his kitchen that night, was the expression on Dennis Cale's face when he worked. Not the expression of a man doing a job. The expression of a man who knows exactly who he is and has decided it is enough. Marty had been coaching for 19 years and he had met very few people who looked like that. Jordan Vess's senior season began with Harwick ranked 12th in the state and ended with them in the state final at Carver Stadium, 7,200 seats, every one of them full. Marty stood on the sideline in the fourth quarter, Harwick up by 4, feel the noise of the crowd like a second heartbeat. Jordan had played the game of his life. 3 touchdowns, 40-yard run on a broken play that nobody in the press box could explain, except that Jordan had seen the lane 2 seconds before it existed, which was not something you coached, except that someone had. With 4 minutes left, Marty looked across the field to the visitors' side and found Dennis Cale in the second row of the bleachers. Not the coach's box, not the sideline, the bleachers, because he had not been credentialed, because the board had a process, because there were standards. He was sitting with his son. The boy was 16 now, and he had his father's some stillness, and he was watching the field the way his father watched it, not with the raw emotion of a fan, but with the quiet attention of someone who understood what he was seeing. Harwick scored again with 90 seconds left. The final whistle came and the stadium came apart, and it was the boy who stood first, not the coaches, not the parents in the front rows, not the athletic director in his blazer. It was Dennis Cale's son who rose to his feet in the second row of the bleachers, and he did not cheer. Not exactly. He simply stood, looking at his father, the way a boy looks at a man when the world has finally caught up to what the boy already knew. The row around them stood. Then the row behind, then the section, then the whole north side of Carver Stadium was on its feet, and the sound of it rolled across the field. And Marty watched it happen and felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a clean word for. He found Dennis in the tunnel, under the east stands 10 minutes later. Dennis was alone, walking out, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and Marty stepped into his path. "I voted no," Marty said. 4 times. "I want you to know I understand what that means now." Dennis looked at him for a moment. Not with anger. There was no anger in him. There never had been. But with the direct steadiness of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has decided recently to set it down. "Jordan knew what he was doing out there," Dennis said. "Jordan knew because you taught him." Dennis nodded once, the way you nod when something true has been said, and there is nothing to add to it. They shook hands in the tunnel, the noise of the stadium still washing down through the concrete above them, and Marty held the handshake a beat longer than necessary, because he was trying to put into it everything the paperwork had failed to say. 2 weeks later, the board voted unanimously to waive the certification requirement. Dennis Cale was offered the position of assistant coach, defensive backs, at Harwick High School. His son was in the kitchen, doing homework when Dennis came home and told him. The boy looked up from his notebook. Just a moment he looked very young, and then he smiled, the same quiet smile his father had, and said, "I know, Dad. I watched." That was all either of them needed.